2, 1. Yeah. All right. 1, 2. Testing 1, 2. 1, 2. Testing 1, 2. Sounds okay, Shane. Is it? It's not. It's not going to be deafening on that anyway. Like. Okay.
I think the level you give me is probably pretty good. I'll tweak it.
You keep eyeing that side of it. Okay. No, I'm trying to. I'm trying to do this. Changes as I can.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because any change I make, no. The only time I will have to change now is if someone uses no.
Sure. No, but I'm also not taking my mics in. What I do with my phone, I'm only taking 11 from my mic. That's because listen what. So actually, I don't want to introduce that game.
Yeah. You're going to pick up a lot of ambient noise to see your own role.
This is a hum. Yeah. Because it has to do with balance, unbalance.
You need to know about that speed anyway, but the only thing about using non-balanced speed is you want to very shocky. If you run out of power, it tends to. That's what I think. That's what creates that kind of noise. I suppose it's just because also something like that everything we know about volume and which record goes to volume. I don't know how we can reduce that now without reducing the.
You know, Seamus Slither.
I don't do this full thing over.
Yeah, yeah. So we're good to go. So this is live. So this is kind of what we're going to do. This is a close up. As you mentioned here, and then this is our wide. Depending on how many people are in the room, I can change how wide or how loose this is, just to fill up with people. So the people are coming in because Joe was saying that you might fill the room. If you don't fill the room, push people. You can push people into here. So the outside seats. Yeah. Well, but everywhere, like, but not so much at the back. Oh, you know, right. People's tendency might be to sit at the back. So then we wanted to. So essentially, what we're doing is we're live on YouTube, and it's not now.
And is it on her? Is the link on her Facebook page?
Can be. Yeah. Are you on WhatsApp?
Yes.
So what I would do is I'm just gonna.
I'll throw my back up here and get these things.
Sure, don't make sense.
Here.
Two, one. Two, one. Two, one. Two, one. Yes. Two, one. Two, one. Or keeping her well. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1. Yeah, sure. Cool. She hasn't put on yet, anyway. 1, 2, 1. One, two. Yeah. 1, 2, 1. One, two. Testing 1, 2, 1. Sound right, but not from this. Yeah, that's fine. We can walk that tomorrow. Wherever. Yeah.
Morning. Oh, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We might just take a minute and we settle ourselves. We just a little bit delayed. I was waiting for Catherine Moylan from Writers Week to come out and join us, but the lady is up to her eyes, so she's maybe won't make it out here, but that's fine. There's a lot going on in there, so we will continue. Thanks very much, folks. I'm delighted to see so many of you here, so many regular faces after all that's happened in the last while. It's just great to actually get back here and to stand up once again. And bear with me now, I'm out of practice. I was never very good anyway, but I'm out of practice. And welcome you all back to Women in Media, Ballybunion and Kilcoolies, right? It's been a while, so just bear with me, right? Back in 2019, I suppose we were struck with the dreaded COVID. We were just weeks away from our next event. And at that point, we had no idea what was ahead of us, did we? And maybe it was a good thing. This COVID thing came down the line and we got bacon, we got painted, we walked, and we generally did our best to try and stay sane for the duration. So it is brilliant to be one of the people that's able to stand up here after all that and welcome you back. And to Women in Media, as I said, to Kilcoolies, to Ballybunion. Now, albeit this is a short form of our usual event, it is nonetheless great to be back here. So thank you all for coming. So in the aftermath of those 2 years, I'd like to think that some of good things did come out of all those rolling lockdowns, that we found time to chat, meet the neighbours and extend the hand of friendship. And I hope that goodwill will continue along forever, that we relearned, I think, at the time. And in that regard, I was delighted that when Catherine and I had a conversation about joining Listowel Writers Week with ourselves, and we were delighted to be invited to join the historic, prestigious event that is Listowel Writers Week. Because Writer Weeks are like ourselves, they're middle-aged. And while women in media, we're only hitting double digits. So it's an honour that we're being, let's stand beside them, shall we say, on their weekend. But it also marks a wonderful coming together of two communities who share similar values and ideals. And I think it signifies a very neighbourly gesture when we all try to restart our events following the unique hiatus that was COVID. Catherine Moylan, who is on her way, I believe, she's a wonderful person. She's kind, she's hardworking, she's innovative, and Writers Week are actually blessed that they have her as a chairperson. And I think anyone that attended Writers Week over the few days will know that. It'll be blatantly obvious at the end of the week. She's a great lady. Miriam O'Callaghan, down there at the back, she needs no introduction. She's been an ardent supporter of women in the media since 2013. She has never once missed the call. And I am truly grateful for that. Miriam has never, ever missed an event here since 2013. So thank you, Miriam, for that. Barbara Scully, I have to say thank you for your continued friendship, support, and a huge congratulations on your publication, her first publication of Wise Up, copies of which are on sale in the lobby. And I'm sure she'll be only delighted to facilitate a signing copy of one when you're leaving. Sarah Carey continually offers sound advice and support in equal measure and always sprinkled with a devilish sense of good humour. Thank you very much, Sarah. And in slightly more formal matters, I have to thank Vodafone Ireland for their support for this event. It has been a pleasure now over the last few years they've been involved. And a welcome and a huge thanks to Rachel Cox, local girl there. She's helping us out here with our inaugural live broadcasting of Women in the Media. Rachel, thank you very much. She's a gem. And so the panellists, I have to say thank you very much for answering the call. Without you, we would not have an event, and we look forward to you all being part of the discussion. And since our first event, we have welcomed many esteemed women from across broadcasting, publishing, politics, and more to share their experiences and their insights of working in the industry. In equal measure, two pieces of advice have emerged: empower women to advocate for themselves and to encourage men to advocate for women. So in matters relating to health, this advice is just as relevant. And Stephen Donnelly's prioritisation of women's health in his role as Minister for Health is an example of men in power, in positions of power, advocating for women. And his plans will hopefully change women's healthcare in Ireland for decades to come. However, you can advocate for women's health and for women more generally without being a member of Cabinet. And Joe Duffy turned his attention to the menopause, and women around the country picked up the phone to share their experience and advocate for themselves and their health. In doing this, he gave a platform to so many women that had been silent on health issues that impact their daily life. And instances like that can show the value that can come from women sharing their experiences and backing ourselves, which is what we aim to do here today. And I'm sure at the end of this, it'll all be fixed in Ballybunion this weekend, so you'll have nothing left to do, Stephen. So no matter where you live in Ireland, unless you're one of the few of us privileged enough to live here in Ballybunion, Ballybunion is not a short trip. So I appreciate your efforts to attend here today, and I know plenty of you got caught on the M50 yesterday as well. But I would urge you all, with my hospitality hat on, to take a bit of time to visit our beautiful Blue Flag beaches, the cliff walks, soak up the sunshine when you're not soaking up the literary magic in Listowel. It's well worth the visit. So without further ado, I think we'll bring on our panelist and Miriam to chair, and we will get started and kick off and make up for the last 2 years. Okay, Miriam?
Thanks a million, Joan. Before I introduce my panel, I just want to say, anyone who knows Joan and her husband, John, I think they're the nicest couple in Ireland, actually. That'd be my analysis, yeah. And as Joan said, it's great to be back. It's great. We all got through everything and we're here. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce you. I don't think many of them need much introduction, but we have the Minister for Health, Stephen Donnelly. God bless him here with all the women. Anne O'Connor, Chief Operations Officer with the HSE. Thanks for being here. Larissa Nolan, Features Editor of the Irish Mirror, brilliant journalist. And the one and only brilliant Senator Lisa. How old's your little boy, by the way? I meant to ask you back there.
He's 2.
Oh, fine, okay. But because I haven't seen her since she had her baby, and these are the important things. And we welcome you all. Thanks so much for being here. I'm actually going to start with you, Anne, because I mean, the title is about women's health post-pandemic, but if you were looking overall at women's health as we emerge from that crisis that is COVID, what state are we in? I think it is.
Yeah.
They say talk close to it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hi, everyone. I think it's very, I suppose, look, we've been through a torrid time, really, haven't we, everybody, whether
Yeah.
you're male or female. And I think where we find ourselves is that people have had a very tough time. And there's very different pictures within that in terms of women and their health. What I see is that we have women who have struggled so at all ends, whether you're a young kind of teenager, female, struggling with, you know, just the pressures of being out of school, etc., or young mothers. We see a lot of people who've had significant issues in terms of having had babies during the pandemic, not having the same networks available to them, the same supports available to them. We have a lot of other women who haven't been able to access services or indeed look after themselves. You mentioned, or I think Joan mentioned all the walking that went on. And for a lot of people, they had an opportunity to look after themselves maybe in a way that they didn't have before when they were juggling work and all of that. But having said that, there's many other women who've struggled, particularly people who either have their own health problems or who are caring for people who had problems, be they health problems, people with disabilities or whatever. So I think everything at the minute about health is really challenging because we're trying to come out of something that is hard to understand, really, in terms of what happened. And I think the impacts won't be felt for a long time. So it is about people kind of regrouping in their own heads and looking after themselves in a different type of way. And from our perspective, in terms of health services, it's very, very challenging because so many people have had their care, you know, deferred and appointments not there, and there's huge delays on certain fronts.
Lisa Chambers, from a public, I suppose, representative perspective, what are you hearing about, you know, how people are coping as we emerge from this pandemic?
Yeah, I think the pandemic I suppose, allowed people to reflect on their lifestyle and look at what was important. So I think that period of having time at home with family and not having to rush here and there and everywhere, that people really valued the flexibility and family time. And you can see the shift. It has really accelerated a lot of changes that we knew were coming anyways, but things like work from home or flexible working, the benefits to society, the benefits to children and family of having parents at home a little bit more. And the fact now that from a public policy perspective that we're enacting laws to ensure that people can actually request flexible working, that kind of stuff impacts on stress levels, on your general well-being. So all of that's really important. I recently, when I was working with Stephen, actually, we were putting together a women's health policy for our party. I conducted a survey, a smaller scale survey to what the Department of Health conducted on women's health. And the overwhelming thing that came back from, I think we had nearly 4,000 responses. So many women reported not feeling listened to. It was a really common response. And I don't think that if you conducted a similar survey among men about their experiences of the health service, would any of them say they didn't feel listened to? Now, I'm not saying there aren't challenges for men accessing the health service, but that was coming back so frequent that I think there's a lot to be said for that and a lot to take from that. And I know that through Stephen's department, there was a radical listening exercise. I hope I've termed that correctly, to try and say, we are actually listening now. We do want to hear, from women what you want from your health service. And interestingly, you touched upon the pandemic. I had my first baby during the pandemic in the first lockdown. And that certainly sparked my interest in that space and just experiencing firsthand, the lack of services because we couldn't do them. There just wasn't the mum and baby groups. You didn't have access to your GP like normal. There was just no supports in terms of the health service, really very limited, because that was the right thing to do at the time. But just how vital those supports are. And I remember going to my public health nurse just a few weeks in for the heel prick test for the little baby. And like I really struggled those first few weeks, like very much struggled. But she said to me, I'm really getting so much of that back on my visits. Mums are really struggling more than usual because of that lack of contact, that lack of services, the support groups, all of that. So yeah, just some interesting takeaways, I think, that we've learned what women do actually need in that period. And I think we can do better. But that allowed us to learn a lot. If we can take anything positive away from the pandemic and those 2 years, is that we really learned a lot about what's important and what's not, and what we need to put in place and what supports people need. So that's a good thing. We can learn from it.
Absolutely. And we have insiders here, particularly Anne. I want to ask her what it was really like inside the HSE during all this. But Larissa is someone, I suppose, as the features editor, you constantly are looking at how people are doing, examining people's lives. How do you think post-pandemic women, I suppose, lives have emerged, and how did they get on during the pandemic?
I think it was very much a tale of two COVIDs for different women. It depends on, your situation and your class, for want of a better description. So you would have, for example, there were issues for certain women in the pandemic that were not even relevant for other women. So, I would say the majority of the people that I know who are mothers are single mothers, actually. Most of them are. And I remember with some bemusement, and this is not to take away from other people's challenges, we were looking at the protests on the street about the right to have the man beside you when you were having your baby. And quite a lot of us didn't have a man at all beside us having our babies. So I regard myself as these are my people, these are my tribe, because they're the people I know. But a lot of them who were, say, single parents with maybe the childcare is gone, the school is gone, you're trying to work in a full-time job, you don't have the second pair of hands there, and the whole thing went from under you. And yet, amazingly, these women carried on and kept on going, which was amazing. But obviously, it's usually the economic fallout that was the case. But I think there have been many studies at this stage to show that those women who are trying to manage on their own suffered more than any other group in society. And that is a huge thing to say when you think of all the groups who are affected in so many different ways, because they were left carrying everything. And I'm kind of amazed that they got through the pandemic in the first place. On the other side of it, everything has been exacerbated. Of course, then we have cost of living issues coming on top of everything else, all of which I think are related probably ultimately to the pandemic and the response that we had to have. So they're continuing to struggle, I think, economically, and that just never seems to change.
Interesting. And Stephen, from your point of view as the Minister for Health, I mean, that's never, ever an easy position. But where do you think we are maybe emerging now post-pandemic? Specifically, first of all, I suppose, in terms of women's health.
So what we've got to do, what Anne and myself and others have got to do, is take whatever silver linings there are from COVID in terms of the health system and use them, right? So one of the things that happened during COVID was there was a level of innovation in healthcare that was completely unprecedented. Things that people had said could never be done were done, and they were done in record time. And I think largely thanks to Anne, the people within the HSE, the people within the department, and a lot of others, I think there's a level of pride in our public health system like there has never been before. You know, I used to live in the UK, I worked in the NHS, and there is an immense pride. If you talk to doctors or nurses or midwives in the NHS, they're fiercely proud of being part of the NHS. And I get a sense, I spent yesterday around Kerry in University Hospital Kerry and with an older persons group, and there's a fierce pride about what has happened. Our healthcare workers are exhausted, and too much has been asked of them for too long. But there's a huge sense of pride. The vaccine program is one of the best anywhere in the world, and Ireland's performance in COVID, brutal as it was, and with so much personal cost for people, we fared better than nearly any other country in terms of the number of people who died, for example. And so there's a belief in our healthcare system that we can be as good as any country in the world. And that's really important. So on women's healthcare, we've an opportunity. So when I came into office, for all the reasons we all understand, we all know there has never been the level of focus or investment in women's healthcare in Ireland that there should be, ever. And one of the things, so when I came into office, I said, look, we're going to change that. We're taking women's healthcare, we're going to take a huge amount of money and we're going to put it in there. We're going to drive this from the voices of women, from patients, from people who use healthcare services, from our clinicians. We're going to put something really ambitious together, not some sort of marginal, let's make things a little bit better year by year. We're going to fundamentally change Ireland's approach to women's healthcare. Lisa, for example, and I, for years, we're talking about endometriosis. And Lisa has been advocating for that for years. So we now have this year, so 2 years ago, there were no specialist endometriosis clinics. By the end of this year, there'll be 6. 2 years ago, there were no specialist menopause clinics. By the end of this year, there'll be 6. By the end of this year, there'll be 6 regional fertility hubs. We're putting in, by the end of this year, hopefully, Anne will tell me if we're on track, but we're putting in place 20 see and treat gynecology clinics. And these are completely revolutionary, right? So at the moment, without these clinics, a woman will go to her GP, then be referred to a gynecologist. Gynecologist will say, I need you to go for diagnostics. That's somewhere else. Then they'll go back to the gynecologist who look at the results, and then they'll be scheduled for a procedure. That can take 6 months to 2 years. It's now being done in one morning in these see and treat gynae clinics. And to give you a sense of how effective they are in the Rotunda, in the first 12 weeks, they reduced the number of women waiting for a year by 90%. So there's something profoundly important going on right now. And I think part of, you know, like we're ahead of target on this stuff. And I think partly that's because there is a new sense of belief and determination in the HSE that when we focus on things, we can be as good as anyone in the world.
Anne, as someone in the HSE, are you as confident?
Yes.
Yes. She's leaving in 3 weeks.
Which is unrelated to any of that.
Yeah, it is unrelated, to be fair.
But yeah, I mean, look, you know, it's very hard, and I don't know how many of you in the room are familiar with how, you know, things work, or if you've got anybody working in the HSE, but the HSE, when you sit outside it, the HSE is just this big amorphous blob of an organisation that's very hard to penetrate and nobody knows their way around it and all of that. But the reality is, you know, there's 140,000 people working in the HSE. It's a hugely complex and diverse organisation. Any one of the care groups, if you take just mental health on its own, is probably bigger than most other companies in Ireland, you know, so it's a massive business in terms of what we do. The business of healthcare is a huge business. So when you try and change, when you try and bring in something, so say when the pandemic came along, you know, we knew something was coming. We knew we were looking at China and we knew that there was a chance something was going to happen, but nobody really knew what that was. But we did a little bit of warning. So we kind of started getting ready as if we were getting ready for a good storm, because we're always good at preparing for storms. We like storms in the HSE and bad weather. So we kind of started off down that track. And then, of course, it became apparent that this was going to be something radically different. And we looked at the pictures from Italy and Bergamo and bodies in the street and all of that. And then, you know, it just became this Armageddon thing really for us. And I think what we saw, and as Stephen said, like you know, it was the reaction. So what I saw as somebody, I've worked in the public health service for 27 years and my background is a clinical background, but I have never seen people mobilize in the way that they did. So regardless of your role or your job, so, you know, if you were a nurse, you carried on nursing, whatever, but there's a whole range of other people that are invisible in the health system. So people who work, for example, in procurement, suddenly had this phenomenal challenge of trying to get their hands on protective wear for staff. And that was a global competition. So trying to actually get things from China, whatever. We had our IT people. Suddenly we had to try and bring in this testing. Nobody knew what this was. What was this COVID testing thing? And we had to start in nursing homes with people going around with iPads, and we couldn't keep track of who they were testing and where the results were going. And we had to build everything on the fly. So we had people working day and night in Dr. Stevens in Dublin, turning around these systems that in other times would have taken us years, possibly years, just to negotiate with the unions in the first place and then introduce in terms of getting staffing in place. But people just moved. And we had a license just to act instead of talk about acting, which made a huge, huge difference. And if I think back to those first 2 months, you know, that March, April time, which I can remember only in patches really, we put in, you know, we had to develop the community testing. We had to put in our community response teams. We had to do so many massive, massive things in the midst of what was a very scary time. And I think, Larissa pointed on, there are different people that are impacted in different ways. And we have a lot of young staff. You know, it came to my attention, the intern working with us at the time, who was in the room. We set up like this war room in Dr. Stevens where we all sat for the days and nights. And we did everything there. So everything was being churned around. And some of us who've been around a while would rely on wicked senses of humour to get us through things. And, you know, you have to have a level of just resilience to be able to deal. Because it was a very serious conversation thinking, well, how many people do we have to plan for in terms of death? You know, when we were talking about temporary morgues around the city of Dublin and where we were going to store bodies. And that all became a bit dark. But it was brought to my attention that this young intern just couldn't cope with being in the room anymore. You know, so this conversation was too grim for this young girl who was about 22. And I think, you know, little things like that made you realize, and we have staff, you know, so working from home is great if you have a home where you can work and you've got a desk and you've got space. If you're a young person in a shared house and you've no privacy and no space, working from home was actually very stressful, and you were cut off from all of your social networks and the support from colleagues in the workplace that maybe helped you get through other things. So I think I've lost complete track of the question you asked me, but it doesn't matter. I'll keep going. So I think that's
Very
the
interesting.
HSE.
Do you know, I often wonder though as well, because and I'm going to bring in Larissa and Lisa now, but like you're probably the most senior HSE woman, female that I've interviewed, say, in prime time, because by and large, it was men, whether it was Tony or Stephen or Ronan, you know, there was a lot of men. But quietly in your war room, was there a lot of senior women or not? Like, were the guys just out front? Or was it men all the way?
So I would say that, and just to point out, Stephen and Ronan aren't in the HSE, they're outside the HSE, just to protect all of us here. But I think the reality is that in my world, and I think I'm right in saying this, there would be many, many calls where I could be the only woman. So you'd have, all of the kind of the seniors, so the CEO, all different people, but a lot of men. In my world, in terms of running, so I ran that space, that integrated operations room that we set up, which was our hub for managing all of the services. There were a lot of really good women as well. And I think that, you know, we have women, and now to be fair to everybody, not every woman, I mean, I didn't, you know, this wasn't planned, you know, kind of sitting here talking to you, Miriam, and who knew this would ever happen, you know, so I think there's a lot of women who have come from clinical backgrounds, who have come from other backgrounds, who don't really want to be doing some of that stuff either. And it's really hard, whether you're a man or a woman, to be fair. It doesn't matter what you are. So I think that it's there are many, many women. And I think, you know, for people to understand, the health service is 80% female. There's a disproportionate number of women at the senior level. And at the very senior level, there's a very small number. And that is kind of by opportunity in some respects, but also by choice. Not everybody wants to work those kind of hours or put in that level of whatever, you know. And I think in the health system, it's a little bit different because people go into the health service for different reasons. Many of us have come up through clinical worlds, and we've come from that patient care piece. So it just depends.
That's interesting, though, that 80% of, I suppose, people working with HSE are women. I've heard it before, but it's just worth remembering. I think Larissa, or is it you or Lisa, made the point as well that quite a lot of women during working from home are also the primary carers. So working from home was often more complicated for women, wasn't it, than for maybe our male counterparts? Sorry.
Well, I don't know if it's just me on this one, but I have an awful horror that maybe what will happen going forward with this working from home thing is that you'll see offices full of men while women are at home trying to balance the childcare and collection and all these other things on top of trying to work, which is actually kind of where it could go. But just to return quickly, actually, just to return, sorry to go back now away from the question, but what Anne was saying there was, I remember doing research for a feature that I was writing about. You know, a lot of people were saying, oh, there are all women, no women making decisions, it's all men at the top. And actually, it wasn't when you looked into it. When you looked into the makeup of NPHET, it was 50-50. And that was, yeah, and I think that's what I was going to say, Stephen, I think it was actually even more that NPHET had, and it was just because you weren't seeing these women night after night at these late night press conferences and all these kind of things, presumably maybe not from lack of opportunity, but as you were saying, from choice. But yeah, I mean, it has changed. I think again, another feature that I was writing about was talking about the biggest change that COVID has actually brought in is the change in working practices. That's the biggest legacy that it will leave. But I would be a little bit concerned that we could be being sold this idea that working from home is fantastic for women. It isn't necessarily fantastic for women, and we'll only find that out in time to come. But I certainly hope that it's not a situation that kind of was a byproduct of us going to work, which we ended up working while minding children as well. Like I remember I was in Uganda years ago, and you'd see all the women, and the women worked in Uganda. It's a matriarchal society. They worked and they looked after the children. And in Uganda, they called it oppression. And they saw it as an oppressive regime that the women were carrying everything. Whereas here in the West, we were calling it freedom. So, you know, I think we have to be careful what comes at the end of the working from home revolution.
Really interesting. Lisa, what about working from home? Like as a public representative, do you think it makes any difference that you're a woman rather than a man if you have to sometimes work from home?
Oh, like I've got a very fortunate home setup and that my partner is fantastic, and it is 50-50, sometimes more on his side in terms of just, you know, keeping the show on the road at home. The challenge for me being a public representative living so far away from where I actually work, I mean, I live in Mayo and I work in Dublin. So I'm missing out on breakfast in the morning or bedtime at night or things like that. So there's that mom guilt that I'm not sure, you know, you can do anything about really. So I do find, you know, midweek, I'm making that extra trip back to Mayo to maybe late in the evening to be there in the morning to come back up to Dublin again. And I don't see my male colleagues doing the same thing. But that's out of choice. I choose to do that. I don't have to do that. But it's important to me to try and get home as much as I can. But certainly, I had Louis in April 2020, so lockdown 1. And one of the blessings or the kind of positive from the COVID situation, and there were so many terrible things about it, were that a lot of my work went online for a period, and some of it's still online. And, you know, I definitely wouldn't have had as much time at home with him if that hadn't have been the case. So I really value being able to tune into committee meetings online, even though I still can't participate in committee meetings remotely, but at least I can log in and be there, and able to meet kind of groups or constituents online. It makes a huge difference to how much time I get with my baby and being at home, and I still get to do my work, get my work done. So I think it's vitally important. And even just talking to friends, you know, I get what Larissa is saying, and that's definitely something to watch out for, absolutely, because women will try and do it all. And the demands and the expectations that we put on ourselves, and that society put on us, that you're supposed to look well, pull yourself together, the kids need to be well dressed, you need to be there on time, amazing career, have loads of babies. It's a huge amount of pressure. I mean, it is. And, you know, I think women are feeling that stress, and that's impacting on our health and our well-being as well. So that's something to watch out for. But I know from talking to female friends, if they can have a bit more flexibility to actually pick up from school and drop off in the morning, those little things are so important, and it's choice. Not everybody wants to do that, but having that opportunity to just be there at those certain points in the day and maybe put in a couple of hours then in the evening time if you want to make up your hours. That flexibility will make sure that women don't check out of their careers for a decade because they don't have that option. And then you're trying to get back in. And that's why we're not seeing women at the same levels in terms of CEO positions, management positions, board positions, even the Oireachtas. You know, we're fortunate enough that in the Seanad, where I am, we have 40% women, but that's partly due to the fact that many of the Taoiseach's nominees were women to make up that percentage. There weren't 40% actually elected to the Seanad. We've 24% in the Dáil, and you can see for yourselves at cabinet level, it's still not balanced. That does matter because women need to be at the decision-making table to bring their lived experience to that process, and you will see a change in outcomes and policy decisions. And you can even see in the conversations, I can notice a difference this term to last term because we've got more women in both chambers, that every week, not a week goes by that there isn't, and I hate even using the term women's issue, but you know what I'm trying to say, that it's talked about on the floor of the houses, which is really important. Like every week we're talking about things like endometriosis or maternity care or, you know, mother and baby homes. There's lots of issues that I don't think they will get the same level of conversation, discussion and airtime if you didn't have women actually there pushing for those to get on the agenda. So it's really, the statistics matter because they have outcomes.
No, I was just going to say that Lisa makes a brilliant point. I was looking at the positive and negatives of it. But of course, if we take the choice element, I just was thinking that if it turns out to be choice, as opposed to you're all working from home now and that's it kind of situation, if we can get choice out of it, it'd be great, because you can talk away about gender and all these kind of things. But ultimately for women, for working women, which we all are now, it's about accommodation and flexibility within the workplace. And if women don't have that, they will leave it. And if they do have that, they'll stay. So Lisa, I have to say, you know, that's a brilliant point to make. And I was possibly erring too much on the side of what might happen. But ultimately, especially if you have a small baby, I'm forgetting, you know, when you go past the small baby stage and into other phases, you actually entirely forget what it was like to have a small baby. But those kind of choices to be there and present with your baby are obviously brilliant and a great outcome. So good point to make. I just wanted
You're
to say.
right. We get amnesia when the baby grows up, and then we go on and have more of them and go, shit. But from your point, Stephen, I suppose you're blessed amongst women, largely in this room as well, actually. But I mean, I suppose, and I think Lisa and Larissa made really interesting points there about working mothers and, you know, loving to have the breakfast. As the Minister for Health, though, and this is just, do you find it's tricky as well? Because your hours must be pretty long.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm in an extreme situation. It's not normal, you know, and both Susan, my wife, and I have, you know, careers and jobs we take very, very seriously. And we got 3 young boys. So there's a pressure on anyway, right? So during the start of the lockdown, I did the homeschooling and was home a lot with the boys and loved all of that. But then was appointed to Minister for Health during a pandemic. And yeah, I mean, I went weeks without seeing my kids, you know, and my youngest at the time was 5, you know, my oldest was 11. And of course they feel it, you know, they feel it. But the 5-year-old would, when he did see me, he'd hug me and he just wouldn't let go, you know, and that's tough because, I mean, Anne, we talked about it in the HSE, like, I mean, we were working 18, 19, 20-hour days. You know, I used to sleep in the car on the way to and from the Department of Health. Sometimes that was the sleep you got. You were working 7 days a week. And you were kind of, even when you were sleeping, your mind was racing. I remember I went for a run at 3 a.m. one night because I just couldn't sleep, you know. And there's a level of intensity. I remember I was going for a run one morning at 6 o'clock in the morning and it was snowing. And then Morning Ireland came on at 7. And the first 4 things were all, and the following terrible thing is going to have to be dealt with by Stephen. Yeah. And I was running and I just thought, Jesus, this is intense. But as a dad, of course it's hard, right? But you have to compartmentalize it and say, this is a moment in time, you know, it's tough. It's the greatest privilege and honor, you know, of my life, and you got to go for it. And you know, but it does mean that Susan has had to take up a very unfair share, which no doubt she'll be looking for back.
Yeah, defo. But is it also, I'm conscious there are two public representatives here. You're a civil servant, aren't you, Anne? Public servant, sorry. Public servant. Myself and Larissa are the journalists. But even hearing you talking there and Lisa a moment ago, it's not a very warm place, is it, right now for any public representative to try to even talk about the fact that they have their own lives, because people are very, what's the word, unforgiving. They don't really care if a public representative has a life or has an issue, because it's a difficult place, I think. I personally wouldn't be a public representative. I think it's quite a tricky role. What do you think?
Yeah, I would always say this job is not for everybody. And it is a little bit like a vocation in that it's either for you or it's not. And there's other jobs I would think I wouldn't be able to deal with. And I think working in the health service, I look at my mum works actually in the ICU in Mayo General. Was on the front line looking after COVID patients and would come home and just compartmentalize like Stephen was doing. And I always think her job is incredibly difficult. They're 12-hour shifts. We were like, I and my family were so worried about her going to work, particularly in the early days before vaccines, So I think there's other jobs as well that I think are incredibly stressful. One of my best friends is a nurse in the hospital as well. Again, 12-hour days. There are days that she doesn't see her two young boys because she's gone in the morning before they get up.
And they
she's
are incredibly hard jobs. They don't get the social media pylons that I think is a phenomenon. It can also happen, to be honest, if you're in the public eye and you're not a public representative. Probably can even happen if you've been on television, and just like, I do think there's a whole dimension that your mother and all those people go in and they do brilliantly and they do incredibly hard work, but they don't then go to their phone and have endless, relentless negativity messages, do they?
No, and that's a particular aspect of the job. I do think that the online space has gotten more vicious. I do think that, yes, it's a problem for all public representatives. It's worse for women. There have been studies done on this that show, take for example, local councillors. If you're a female local councillor, you'll get 8 times more abuse than your male counterpart. So the levels of abuse that we get are often more personalised as well, about your appearance, the tone of your voice, how you look, your weight, your dress. It's very not often about your ability or the work you're doing or the opinions you've had, or which we can all take. So there's a level of fair criticism that you expect in this job, but we've gotten to such a level in public life that there is no room for making a mistake. You're not allowed to be human and to make a mistake, because the consequences are that you're just cancelled or you're fired or it's not like any other job in that respect. And because of that, it does have a chilling impact on discourse. You limit your interactions online in particular. There are days you think, I just can't deal with the backlash, so I'm just not going to comment. And that's not a good thing, that we have that chilling effect on people. You're in public life to give your opinions and to have a position, to have a view and to participate. But people are participating less and keeping their heads down. I won't name this person, but one of my colleagues recently said to me, she felt that she had said something wrong when it came to the mother and baby home debate. And the pile-on was so severe. She said, I'm just not going in there to speak in the chamber unless I have to speak. I'm just pulling back for now because I just can't go there again, because she found that period so incredibly stressful. And it is, I think it's not only is it having that chilling effect, but there are people making a decision to leave public life maybe sooner than they would have done, because they're just going, I can't cope with this and my family don't want to deal with it anymore. So it is, and that's not unique to Ireland. It's a problem globally, but it will have an impact on the types of people that come forward. And the people that stay, and it's a difficult place for a woman to come into anyways. But if we have those extra barriers to getting in and to staying in, we're going to struggle to get those numbers up.
And nurse, and then I will bring in both Anne and Stephen, but the social media pylons, because sometimes people, and we now count the number of female guests on primetime, for instance, twice a week, huge show. But a lot of the time, you might phone someone because you'd have a late breaking story late in the day, and if it's a woman, they often say to the researchers, geez, I'd love to do it, but would you just tell Miriam or whatever, I haven't got my hair done. And literally you go on television as a woman and all anyone does is their feed will be full of nasty comments about their appearance. And that's only a small little thing, but that's a lot of times why women do not come on television if it's late in the day. I mean, that whole social media cancel pile on, it is quite stressful for people. Do you think?
I think that it affects men and women in different ways, basically. So, I mean, I think for me, what I seem to find, I ignore it all. By the way, I don't think Twitter is real. I've decided to operate on that.
Good luck with that.
I operate on that basis, and I think one of the major problems that the media has had, the mainstream media, is that they have been responding to Twitter. Twitter sometimes is the editor of a lot of papers. I think the point was made before about the New York Times that Twitter is its ultimate editor. But I think people forget that, especially newspaper editors forget that 90% of the content on Twitter is posted by 10% of very loud people. And actually, if you drill down to a lot of their kind of ultra woke, ideology, it's usually, there's been studies showing that it's usually people on six figures who are highly educated or possibly overeducated, and they're usually white men. So actually, that's an interesting statistic. There are these kind of crusaders who are trying to make themselves feel better about life by attacking and bringing down other people. So yeah, I just operate on the basis that it's not real. I ignore it altogether. But however, the odd time someone rings me up and says, "Oh, did you see what was written about you on Twitter?" And I think I've more things to be doing with my time now. But anyway, let me know. So it's a funny one. It's kind of an insidious thing about me. I noticed that it's another way of being, and I'm very rarely do I call something sexist, right? Because I just don't believe in any of that stuff. I think we should all be the same and just get on with it. But there was one thing that comes up again and again with me, which is, oh, that one's always looking for attention, right? So I think that seems to be, if you're a woman with informed, strong, and possibly unpopular sometimes opinions, the new way of saying, shut up, woman, is you're just looking for attention. Because, of course, I couldn't be just doing it for the debate purposes. I have to be looking for possibly male attention on some level. So it's funny the way it changes around. I'm hoping that what's going to happen over the years, I'm hoping the media will stop responding, the mainstream media will stop responding to Twitter as if it's real. And I'm hoping that people will become more resilient to what's said about it. And I'll have to be honest, a lot of the time when I hear women talking about how upset they are about what's said on Twitter about them, I think you do have a choice. You can ignore it. You can completely ignore it. I know it's upsetting. I had a situation once 10 years ago where somebody was posting horrible stuff about me all over the place, sending emails and using social media to completely smear me in the most disgusting of ways. I ended up having to call in the Gardaí. It turned out to be a woman, actually, who was behind it. So you just don't know what's happening. I think we all have to start, if we're to move forward, and if everyone is to we have to start, it's like a bully. You've got to, I mean, obviously sometimes bullies can't be ignored, but I think we have to somehow start saying, I'm just going to get on with my life. I'm not going to ignore this. I'm not going to pay attention to this. And I think the media has a role to play on that. Stop contributing to the pylon. Stop giving it front page headlines and just move on into a new era.
I mean, I suppose the Minister for Health, you're entitled to rigorous, tough interviews. That's what you get and that's what you deserve to get. But actually, in terms...
Very sophisticated political operators have weaponized Twitter, right? So if you look, an awful lot of it is fake, but very clever, very well orchestrated. In terms of the horrific stuff you get, no, you can't look at it. Like, you couldn't get up in the morning if you were to internalize it. I remember I met my mum one day. I met her for a coffee and she was really upset. She doesn't tend to get really upset in front of me anyway. She was really upset. And I said, Mum, what's going on here? What is this? I was kind of worried. And she said, have you seen what they're saying about you on Twitter? And I said, I told you never to open that box, right? I said, don't ever open that box. I said, just put it away, right? However, I think what Larissa said is essential, because whilst most of it is orchestrated and politically it's weaponized, it's not just random viciousness. It's highly organized, highly effective. Trump, Brexit, the AfD, Le Pen, that's Twitter and Facebook, right? And if you talk to computer scientists about elections that didn't go the way they were meant to go, what the computer scientists will tell you is it was online. You've seen the movie, the Brexit movie, whatever, with Benedict Cumberbatch, right? That was Facebook. They weaponized social media. But the problem is, as Larissa said, unfortunately, as a public representative, it seeps into the mainstream media. And that makes it real, because politically, if you're trying to do something that's really difficult, like in healthcare, as we all know, like the biggest problem in healthcare is not that there isn't enough money or that there aren't enough clever people or there aren't enough ideas and plans. The biggest problem is getting things done. Because when you try to make decisions in healthcare, people are very, very strong and deeply held.
People like Anne.
People like Anne, right? And people rightly voice their opinion, right? But politically, you have to be able to make decisions and you have to be able to take on flack. But when a small number of people can amplify something so that it looks like half the country is against what you're doing, the political support for really, really important decisions you have to make can sometimes ebb, right? And so I think there's a few things. I would love, yes, the mainstream media more and more and more to just say, we're just not listening to that because it's just not real.
But Stephen, and politics, because we know the three pillars of propaganda are politics, media, and big business. Big business being tech, and then you politics and big media. Sorry, we all have to stop responding to this because it's actually driving a whole propaganda. And I mean, I'm often wondering about every time there's a revolution in media. You know, like when print was discovered, it changed everything. And then when TV was discovered, people tend to go back to the Stone Age or something. We've gone back to stoning people and fire, you know, what you call those fire, you know, racing with the flames to people's houses and things like that. We've really gone back to medieval times with things like, you know, pylons, witch hunts, the crucible type element. I mean, it's really, really brought us back. And I think that, you know, the sometimes controversial psychologist Jordan Peterson said that it was distinctly unsuitable to the human psychology. I think that's probably the best description of it that I've heard. But we as responsible people, the propaganda is what's keeping it going. And not just media, but politics also has to stop responding to it. And I don't know how that's going to happen. I have a terrible feeling it's going to be through just trial and error. We'll have to make so many mistakes that we finally realize that it's wrong, you know. But
Well, like now we're trying to regulate that space, which I think is an impossibility. You know, we're trying our best to have an online media regulator that we can actually curtail some of the abuses online. But I think when you have a political system that now there's an expectation that, I mean, we have cabinet ministers announcing new policies via Twitter. So in our space, you can't just check out. I would love to just close my accounts. I really would, because bar Instagram, which I think is quite nice. But the other stuff is just toxic. But if you don't actually comment on Twitter, then the view is among mainstream media and among your colleagues and in the Oireachtas that you haven't actually got an opinion on this issue because you haven't tweeted about it.
you've got to be on it. Have you? Just a quick question. You've got to be on it?
Well, we're not mandated, but if you're not on it, you're just not in the mix. You know, you completely fall off the radar. And because of the way that journalism has gone as well, and you've got lots of young journalists that are not paid very well, they've got particular reporting deadlines, they're supposed to churn out stuff every couple of hours. The easy thing for them to do, which I can understand, grab it off Twitter, get a quick comment of you and you, there's your story, bang it out on social media. It's not the same process now in terms of, you know, editorial review, because
God,
it's
no wonder
done online.
journalism's gone down the tubes.
Well, I didn't say that now.
Well, it has.
But it's
has.
changed.
It really has. And like, I refuse to be on Twitter. I'm a Twitter refusenik. I remember over the years, editors saying, but you have to be on it. I said, no, but I'm not going to be on it. And actually, weirdly, nothing happened. No difference. I continued on as ever. So I think that maybe, you know, it might be worth trying not to be on Twitter. Although I kind of feel like you guys sort of have to be, but I don't think journalists have to be.
Yeah, no, whatever. I suppose at your level in the HSE, you're not on Twitter, are you, Anne?
I am.
Ooh.
I don't do a whole lot on it. No, I mean, I was on Twitter before COVID. As I keep saying to people, I was around the health service before COVID. But really, the Twitter thing was more about, you know, health messaging, services, you know, commending staff or services, that type of thing. And then with COVID, but I'm not a big tweeter. I find it interesting to look at, but I don't put much up on it unless it's informative.
The other thing I wanted to move on to ask you is, like, this, obviously we're talking about women here, it's the women media, but before we were just coming up to sit here, you mentioned, Anne, that interestingly, our focus here is on women, but actually it's men's health that often is the outlier, that they are far less good at looking after themselves. That is not, I know I'm in a room of women, but like we all have husbands or partners or sons or fathers or brothers that we love.
Absolutely. No, I mean, society needs the men.
Is that the case? But are men, though?
Yeah, no, it
Go
is.
on.
It is. I think all of the evidence, when you look at health outcomes, and that's not to take away, this isn't an either or debate. Do you know what I mean? In terms of health, it's everybody needs good health. And I think the issue is that women often will attend to their health more. So I think there's a couple of things about health broadly. You know, reality is your health, you know, good or bad, is not dictated by health services, number one. Your health is dictated by where you were born, all of those social determinants of health, how you're educated, you know, the whole thing in terms of your, you know, food poverty, et cetera, et cetera. So you have all of that that is actually determines how healthy you may be. But what we know is that men generally don't pay as much attention to their health. And I was, before I was in this ridiculous job, I was the National Director for Mental Health Services. And, you know, we did a lot of focus in terms of Connecting for Life at the time and self-harm, suicide and all of that. And I think the evidence is that a lot of men, you know, and there's a big campaign at the minute, for example, around farmers, in terms of the talking bit, you know, men don't talk about things. So whether, you know, physical health is dependent on good psychological health, if you have people who don't talk, who don't, you know, say that they're worried, go and seek help, all of that, it plays out across the board. And I think that, you know, we still in Ireland, I think younger men are more, you know, kind of, I have a 21-year-old in my life who's, you know, very caught up in, you know, everything about his health, and he'd drive you nuts about it. But I think, you know, there's an
His
age
mother
thing.
is.
Yeah, there's an age thing. I'm the worst mother. If it's 2 paracetamol, glass of water, and too much gaming is usually the other diagnosis. But I think in terms of, you know, men actually being able to talk, and I think having, you know, that kind of thing about, you know, not letting people feel they let themselves down if they come forward and say there's something wrong. I think men, you know, for reasons that we're covering in all sorts of ways here, you know, they're out, they're doing whatever. And I do think society puts a big issue or a big pressure on men to perform as well. I think women have different pressures, and I think certainly, you know, women are expected to magic up all sorts of wonderful things and have a good career and, you know, whatever, be Mother Earth and, you know, cook, I don't know, healthy stuff all the time or whatever, and smile and look happy. That I think that's one challenge. But I think men, I don't think that you can say that men have it any easier in some respects. I think it's different. There's different types of challenges, but I see, and there's a lot of men who have very difficult lives as well, and a lot of women. So like I'm not in the space of an either or thing at all when it comes to healthcare. I think you have to look, and I think different groups, different populations, and I think for healthcare, the future is about identifying people so everybody's not the same. And in terms of health services, how they access health services, how they can absorb health information, all of that. And I think in terms of from the ground up, when, you know, babies, early intervention, schools, the messaging to children about health, respect for themselves as well as others, all of that stuff, it's really complex. But I don't think we should forget that there's a lot of people out there who need access in different ways that we're working towards. It's a big machine, you know, in terms of trying to turn it all around at the same time, but men too suffer.
Yeah, I mean, we got lots of statistics trotted out every now and again, and you know, there's people behind those statistics. But recently, you probably were aware of the Women's Health Conference that I hosted in Dublin, and one of the statistics that has really stuck with me, I was just completely floored by it. We had Mary Bridget Collins from Pave Point was on one of our panels, and she said of a community of 40,000 travellers in Ireland, only 4 members of that community are above the age of 85. Which I had never heard. And I just thought, wow. And I spoke to her afterwards about it. And we know as well that traveller, men and women, are more likely to die by suicide. Their life
6 times more likely.
Yeah, their life expectancy is much lower. So I had met with Pave Point previously. We were discussing when we were putting the women's health policy together, and access to services, being treated with respect, with dignity. They felt discriminated against, not taken seriously. But you know, going in to have their babies, were not treated. They felt the same as other women in the ward, which I just think is shocking and disgraceful, and that shouldn't be allowed to happen in 2022 in a modern, progressive, Republican country. But one of the things that Pave Point would say, that because there's such a distrust in that community of the health service and other state institutions, that very often they're accessing services through a trusted source, like their local traveller network or the Pave Point, because they trust the information they get from there. So that link between those kind of organisations, it's like a bridge between the community and the health service. Is really, but again, this was like I was learning this on the go, and you know, that was my own ignorance, not knowing the stuff beforehand. I knew there were problems, but actually the numbers are just
the numbers
really
are horrific,
shocking.
and certainly you're absolutely right. And in a previous job again, I was working in the north side of Dublin, where we had a number of kind of traveller areas, if you like, and populations. And the reality is, the way to deliver services in those areas is to train in primary healthcare workers who are travellers in the travelling community. They don't want the HSE arriving in their cars to do visits, thank you, because there's also, you've got to remember that the HSE until 2014 had childcare as well. So, you know, in terms of children's services, there's an absolute paranoia in terms of who's watching you and all of that. And I think we do a lot of work with Pathway Point. We've done a lot of work on traveller mental health. So we have traveller mental health coordinators now around the country to try and just, again, bring up that, I suppose, to level the playing field a little bit. We can't level the playing field, but in terms of actually just providing better access in a way that is meaningful. And I think that's something for me as the years have gone on, and we've really learned during COVID. We can message all we want, but if we're not messaging about healthcare in the way that people can hear it, then it's a waste of all of our time. And I think it is about listening, and hopefully we're starting to do that a lot better in terms of just different communities, different populations, trying to understand what works, you know, because we're great on the big bureaucratic, you know, state message, but that doesn't mean anything to a lot of people.
But what was really shocking for me to learn as well is that obviously the first port of call for the health service is your GP. We all have a GP that we go to. That's where you go if something's wrong. But say, for example, within the Roma community, a lot of those individuals and women in particular don't want to give an address. So they don't have a GP. When they go in to have their babies in hospital, often when they go in to deliver, is the first time they've actually engaged with the health service, and they're landing into they've had none of the checks up until that point. They don't want to give an address, so there's no follow-up public health nurse visits. There's a whole raft of issues there. And again, us trying to, I suppose, push people through a particular way of accessing this health service that might suit us is the wrong way to do it. We have to have access in a way that works for every community. And that's something that I think we're only starting to kind of do now or do better, you know?
Those issues are very complex. Social issues, I think, when you're talking about the Roma community and the traveller community, and that stat you gave there about the 4 over 85 is quite stark, all right. But I would say that at the moment, the biggest problem we're having is actually with the majority of people who are just the working people, the people who are working very hard. And I don't know if anybody else has heard this, but I've hearing of a lot of people taking second jobs in order to cope with the rising cost of living that's just happened in this last year. But another thing I'm hearing a lot this year about is the cost of medical care for working people who don't have any supports with the relation to medical care, which is quite a low bar, I think, actually, in order to be able to get one. A girl said to me the other day, I said she had something specifically wrong with her. She needed to go to the doctor anyway. And I said, go down to the doctor. She said, I can't afford it. And I said to her, how much are you on? And I said, just tell me how much you're on. And she said, €45,000 a year. But when you think about it, if she's at the moment, she's the only worker in the family. There's her husband as well. She's got 2 children. They're trying to pay mortgages, gas bills, energy bills, all of which have gone up by 30, 40%. Shopping is going up. You go into the shop, there's €1 on everything for no known reason compared to yesterday. And she was saying between shopping bills and everything, she just cannot afford. Now, this is a girl who doesn't go on big holidays. She's not out buying clothes or anything like that. But the actual cost of living meant that in her case, she couldn't go to the doctor. Now, if we have women who are working on €45,000 a year and they can't go to the GP, we have a much bigger problem with the health service than anything we're talking about here today. That is a really, really big issue. So we're looking at that. We're looking at, you go to the pharmacist, it costs you a fortune to get anything. And you hear a lot of people just saying now at this stage that for the working person, maybe if you're nearly better off if you're on supports because you have the medical card, at least as some sort of buffer. But for the working person, they may be putting off really serious health issues by not going to the doctor. And again, that has knock-on effects on their children if they get unwell. So I think we have to look at that. And there's one other thing I just want to say, because it hasn't been said yet. And I'm afraid that the conference might end without me getting to say it. Terrified.
Say it.
You say it. It won't affect a lot of it. It wouldn't affect me anymore. And it might affect a lot of people in this room. But the issue of free contraception that was promised during the repeal referendum, 4 years ago now? It's 4 years ago, isn't it? That repeal was 2018. I knew that when that wasn't brought, we brought in abortion. Abortion is free. So we have a situation at the moment now, and both of you will be aware of this, where we have a perverse situation. That's not my words, by the way. I'll tell you who said that in a minute. We have a perverse situation whereby we have free abortion. If a woman has a crisis pregnancy, she is offered a free abortion in Ireland, but she's not offered the means to prevent it. So you can say that maybe the person on the medical card can get free contraception, but the person, that vast swathe in the middle, we have this brilliant new thing called the Mirena coil, new enough in that it's been around for the last 10 years or so. It's 99.99% effective or thereabouts. If you get the Mirena coil, you will not get pregnant. Unfortunately, it's €400 or thereabouts to get it fitted and bought and all the rest. So I think I'm always saying this to people, the way I explain this to people is that when I was growing up in Rockypool Crescent, which Stephen might know because he's in my constituency in Blessington, although the people in the East Wicklow, they never come over to the west side, so they haven't a clue. They don't know over that mountain range. But anyway, I grew up in a council estate essentially, and my best friend grew up in a big house at the top of the road. And when we were growing up, and I was highly fertile as we all were at that age group, she would have been able to get that preventative coil and been known that she wouldn't get pregnant. And if I had gotten pregnant, because we wouldn't have had that money up front, I would have been offered a free abortion. So that isn't, we can't call ourselves a progressive society in relation to reproductive health before we address that. And just to make a little bit of a comparison, in Britain, they've had free contraception since the 70s. And I was talking to a woman called Anne Farady, who is the head of the British Pregnancy Advisory Council. And she said to me that was the woman who said, this is a perverse situation. Why would you have abortion and not the means to prevent it? The two things have to go hand in hand. So that's something I feel that while we're all outraged about debates over the National Maternity Hospital, and we're outraged about, as I was saying earlier, whether your husband could be with you during COVID, we're outraged about all these things, paternity leave, and nobody has come out and said, we could prevent these crisis pregnancies, we could prevent the need for women having to go through the trauma of abortion if we just did this thing that we said we were going to do in the first place. I wouldn't lay the blame for this at your door, by the way. This should have been done by Simon.
Let's blame him.
Simon. No, I can't. I'll tell you why I can't. Because Simon Harris promised to do it. It was in the Oireachtas recommendations. He was supposed to do it. And as we know in Ireland, if something isn't done immediately, something else will come along, like COVID or cost of living and all these other things, and then it takes years to go. But there isn't that political will there, and there isn't that public will.
When are we going to get?
Well, I know he can tell me because I know the answer. But I let Stephen take over here because it's from the under 25s, I think, from September, which is at least a start. It's not at least something. Well, I'll let you go from there, Stephen. I'll take over. I'd started becoming Miriam then.
That was good. Yeah, you're very good.
It's all feeling a bit prime time now, isn't it? Well, Miriam. So August. It's coming in August.
For a certain age group.
So we're starting, we got, so for 17 to 25 year olds, that's where we're starting. Now we're going to move it out to everybody, but you have to start somewhere. And you have to start somewhere because it's whilst it's incredibly important and it is one of the cornerstones of the Women's Health Action Plan. And as you say, it should have been here a long time ago. And I was up with the family planning team up on Parnell Street a while ago. And I genuinely was so proud to be there as the Minister for Health, listening to them, because they were set up in the 60s or the 70s directly in response to women's healthcare problems from the banning of contraception. And here we were. It was just lovely to go in as the Minister for Health, because people are normally just shouting at you the whole time, to say, well, we're bringing it in. It's going to be free. So this is a really important landmark thing that's happening in August, right? So we're starting.
It's actually the biggest change, a revolution for women. If you're going to get that nearly 100% contraception, and that will be covered, obviously, the Mirena coil, the most modern. That's it's amazing.
And to be clear, like we're covering, it's the GP consultation, it's the fitting, it's the equipment, it's the pharmacy, everything is covered, right? So we're starting 17 to 25 year olds. That's the expert advice we got. We have to phase it in. And we did have to fight for it. And I did talk to Lisa and others and say, now I need you guys to, like, we need to create a real
Oh, you got like the copies. Oh, great. Here, let's play that.
Yes, yeah. So I said,
Okay,
we're going to. No, we do it now. Okay.
Shake this book, shake this book, yeah.
Here.
Good afternoon, everybody. And you're very welcome to the second session here in Ballybunion in the Women in Media event in association with Listowel Writers Week. Isn't it brilliant to be back in person in a room at an event? Yeah. It's great to see everybody. So thank you very much for coming out, and great kudos to Joan for getting this event off the ground and for having survived the last 2.5 years, which weren't easy for any business, well, for a lot of businesses, but particularly for the hospitality business. I know I'm not the only woman who really felt there was something major missing in my life when I didn't get my weekend in Ballybunion in May. So it's great. It's a little bit later, but it's great to be here. And as usual, the weather, anytime I'm here, the weather seems to be great and the sun seems to be shining. Again, I don't know how Joan manages that, but she seems to crack it every year. This panel is going to probably, I was going to say take the mood down, but I mean take the mood up. I mean, last panel was very good, but obviously serious topic. This isn't a serious topic. We're going to talk about a little bit about storytelling. So I thought I would gather two of my friends and two of Ireland's most successful novelists, but also women who I know are great crack for a bit of a chat about storytelling. So I want to welcome back to Ballybunion for your second gig, isn't it, at Women in Media. Here on my left is Claudia Carroll, writer, playwright and actor in a former life. You might remember her from RTÉ's Fair City. I think I'm right that you've published 17 novels to date, is that correct?
That's right. Thank you, Barbara.
Which is impressive. And your latest novel is called The Fixer, and I'm going to come back to that in just a moment. On my right-hand side, again, writer Anna McPartland, again, author of, I think you said last night, 12 books, which is, equally impressive. And Anna is also a screenwriter, and has been a writer on some well-known British dramas, such as Holby City, and I think there's something else she's working on at the moment. So we're going to hear all about that in a moment. And also, when I was doing my research, discovered that Anna had a stint as a stand-up comedian, and I thought I must ask her about that. And then I was lucky enough to have dinner with her last night, where I got the full force of the stand-up comedy. And honestly, it was really something else. I want to talk to you a little bit about that. My name is Barbara Scully. I'm a writer and broadcaster, and as of last week, an author, which I'm still fizzing with excitement about. And I will shamelessly mention my book on probably more than one occasion during this conversation. My book is called Wise Up, and it's about wisdom, power, and older women. And it's a bit of crack as well. I mean, it's a light read, which I'm hoping people will enjoy. And it's for sale outside afterwards if anybody would like to buy one. Okay, that's the ad over. I'm going to start, Claudia, with you and coming back to your latest book, which is called The Fixer. And I was reading again when I was doing my research. I was reading about where you got the inspiration for this, and I was actually fascinated.
True story. Do you know, I always think, I don't know if you and Anna agree, but I always think real life trumps any fiction you could possibly invent. And the idea for this one came, and again, this sounds like I made it up, but I swear to you I didn't, from an article I read in the New York Times. And it was about, it was called The Mistress Catcher. And I thought, what is a mistress catcher? And it's an actual true line of employment that happens in extremely wealthy social circles in Asian countries, but particularly in China and Shanghai particularly, where just say you have a partner and at very, very high strata of wealth, like unthinkable sort of money for the rest of us. And there's, let's just say in your relationship, there's a third party, a bit like Charles, Camilla, and Diana, 3 of you in the marriage, and one of you is unwelcome. And you want this third, you don't want a divorce because you've got kids, you've got a life, you've got homes, you've got properties, you've got a social status. You just don't want a divorce. You want to sort your partner out majorly, but you don't necessarily want the relationship to come to a thundering crash. So you employ, true thing, a mistress catcher, who will come in, and the mistress catcher is devious and manipulative and basically a bitch. And we all know one. I mean, you know, and she will come in and she won't go near you, the employer, but she will target on the mistress and will befriend them. She will discover who you are through people. You know, people are so unguarded in their private lives now because of Instagram, because of Twitter, because of social media. She will research you. She will do your homework on you. She will find out where you hang out, where you go for coffee. Are you in a gym? Is there a particular club you're associated with, where you like to hang out with your buddies? She will be where you are. And she will kind of inveigle her way into your life sideways, and will just persuade you away from the person you're having the affair with. And, you know, kind of very discreetly, like, what are you doing with that Aegis? You know, like, look here. And possibly very successfully in a lot of cases, earning vast amounts of money in the process. And in some cases, even getting your problem third party to relocate to a different city, different job, and introducing them to different relationship potentials and shoving them out the exit stage left that way. And I thought, do you ever have someone in your life that you kind of want to break up with? Not necessarily a partner, but just a friendship that's past its sell-by date, somebody that's just driving you mad, a mother-in-law, somebody that is just, you just think, my life would be 90% happier if I did not have that person. This is who you send for. And this person will just make the problem disappear. I'm not telling you anymore.
Okay, so giving us that backstory, tell us roughly what is The Fixer about? I mean, is it set among this community?
But great crack to write. You know the way these ones. But you think,
And is it set in China? Or
no. Oh God, no, set in Ireland.
Oh, brilliant.
Yeah, where everybody knows everybody, so it's even more easier to track people down or get a handle on them. You know, you might say, okay, look, there's this person here in my life. I just want them to kind of just nothing to happen to them, but just for them to just leave me in peace. And you go, oh, that's my next door neighbor's cousin's second, old neighbor from. We all know each other. You can get a handle on anyone pretty quickly.
I think we need to put a disclaimer, like they do on television programs. Please do not try this yourselves.
You know what Maeve Binchy said, the late great? She said, when you pick up a book and at the very start it said, this book is fiction. Any resemblance to any person, real or living, is purely coincidental. That's the fiction.
So The Fixer in all good bookshops now. Anna.
Hello.
Your stand-up comedian career, I mean,
died on its arse because I wasn't good.
Well, I mean, the
or committed, or particularly happy about standing. For
the performance you gave last night over dinner, and I wasn't the only one there. There was quite a few of us who were blown away by it.
We were having a laugh.
Okay.
All of us together.
I know, you were leading it.
Yeah, I was.
But tell me about
a mighty crack.
Why did you decide, and when did you decide, and how long were you a stand-up comedian for? Because we all know the world needs more women in comedy, for sure.
I got into it kind of by accident because when I left school, I grew up in Kerry, in Kenmare, and in the 80s, and I thought I wanted to be an actor. And I kept saying, my aunt and uncle raised me in Kenmare, and I kept saying to them, I'm going to be an actor. And they were like, oh, you're not. No. And I was like, no, I am. They're like, oh, absolutely not. You're not going. You'll be a nurse, or you'll be, I don't know, Tony, what, an air hostess or a teacher or something, or maybe you'll work in a bank, Anna. Anything with a pension is good for us. But you're not going to be an actor. Don't be so ridiculous. Where do you think you live, right? So I was like, no, I'm definitely going to be an actor. I'm passionate about it. I never acted. And, but I knew I wanted to be a storyteller, and I didn't realize that it was possible for me to be a writer at that point. And it never even dawned on me that I could do that. But I kind of saw some young ones acting, so I thought maybe I'll do that. So I came to Dublin and I tried to be an actor, and I absolutely despised every second of it after banging on for 2 years. But I want to be an actor. I'm passionate about being an actor. And I went, oh, Jesus, what am I going to do? Like, how am I going to segue out of this, right? And become, work for the bank. And a friend of mine was doing it with me, and she was like, why don't we just try a bit of stand-up? And I was like, oh, okay, we'll do that. So that's how it was, just purely me trying to get out of acting without losing face. So I started doing stand-up with her, and it was a duo, and we called ourselves the Love Canal because we thought we were hilarious, and it was the 90s. And yeah, and the Love Canal. Mm-hmm. And that's why I'm not a stand-up comedian today.
Did you do a few gigs?
Oh, we did loads of gigs. We were on the scene for at least 2 years with all the lads. Like, we were giving it socks for 2 years. We were not great. We were okay. We got a few laughs. We were kind of in the middle. Do you know what I mean? Like, we didn't die a death. Like, some people got up on the stage and there was just crickets, like, and I'd be on the side, crying. There was this guy used to come up, and his whole act was just to put on a polo neck and cover his face with it and stand there and talk with a Cork accent. And there'd be German tourists going, and they're all looking around, and I would be literally on the side of the stage going, oh, it's much more crack being here than actually being on the stage, like, and everybody whispering and blah, blah. It was just hilarious, and he loved it. He didn't give him monkeys, like.
Taking you back to something you said when you said that you were in Kerry expressing to your aunt and uncle that you wanted to be an actor, and you said then you knew you wanted to be a storyteller. How did you know you wanted to be a storyteller?
I was dyslexic, so when I started my school life in Dublin. And back then in the 70s, I was in Our Lady of Victories in Glasnevin, and they started to realize that I was dyslexic around the age of about 6 or 7. And at the time, being the 70s, they had the slow class, right? It was like, we'll bring her into the slow class, doing you a favor. Anna, you, Jessica, come on, love, into the slow class, right? Because you know what I mean? And they didn't know what dyslexia was. They just thought you were a bit stupid, right? So they'd bring you in and they'd work with you or whatever. And then you'd get out of slow class and you'd join everybody else. And so my mother knew there was a problem, and she used to work with me because she realized, like, stupid things like spellings, that if she asked me a spelling, I could say it, no problem. It was when I wrote it. So she was trying to work out what was going on. And so anyway, I suppose I carried that with me. And I was quite mild because there was intervention with me. It wasn't particularly brilliant intervention, but there was some intervention. And when I ended up in Kerry and in a small school, there was...
You should mention that your mum died when you were, what, 11?
Well, my mum went into a home in the Royal Hospital in Donnybrook when I was 11. She had multiple sclerosis. So we were together. My parents separated when I was 5. She ran from Kerry up to Dublin to her mum, who took her in the 70s when nobody, very few people ran away from bad marriages then. And my mum was just, look, I'm done. Come on, let's go. And unfortunately for her, she ended up having progressive multiple sclerosis. So kind of from when I moved up when I was 5, from the age of 5 to 11, it really progressed very, very quickly. And my granny at that point was like, she was 80. My mother was only 40 and my granny was 80. She'd had her when she was 40 years old. She was a whole different story. But so she was quite, disabled by the end of it as well. So I was kind of 11 years of age, kind of a carer and so eventually anyway, the social came in, and it's so grim, isn't it? But really, it was lovely. And the social came in and went, listen, we're not having this anymore. And my aunt, my father's sister, came up and said, we're taking her. And I went down to Kenmare, and I suddenly ended up being an only child to having a brother and 4 sisters. And it was actually magic, to be honest with you. And my mum was in the Royal Hospital in Donnybrook till I was 17, and I'd come and I'd go, and I'd have my life in Dublin and my life in Kerry. And she died when I was 17.
Sorry, I just realized I derailed you as well
Yeah.
with all of that. So your dyslexia, how did that?
Oh yeah, so it manifest because I loved English, and I loved writing essays. And the one thing that whenever I wrote an essay, it was always passed around the school, and I was all, oh my God, blah blah blah. But of course, it was riddled with all these inaccuracies and mistakes. And I always thought you had to be, like this literary genius. And realistically, I am not now, nor never will be. But what I am is a storyteller. And so I thought that if I couldn't be that person, the literary genius, well, then what I'd be is I'd tell the story through acting. And then I realized I didn't have the patience nor the will for the acting. It was just like, oh, this is just embarrassing. It wasn't me.
Okay, and what about yourself, Claudia? Would you obviously would consider yourself equally a storyteller? And I know you did the acting obviously first, and we're better at it than she was, clearly.
Clearly.
No, do you know, the thing about the acting profession is it's luck. It is just luck. That's it. It's just stupid, dumb luck. And you ask anybody in the cast of Fair City, and 99% of the stories are just being in the right place at the right time, and that's it. And banging, I mean, all the things that after the age of 40, you just haven't the energy for anymore, which is having to bang down the casting director's doors, and you just think, oh, I'm too tired. Do I have to keep at this? But it is a rotten. I mean, it's a tough gig. And the thing about acting is, for guys, it's easier, much easier, because for every cast there is, like for every play, there is. My own agent told me there's an 80-20 ratio, 8-2 ratio of men to women in any cast. So for every eight guys in a cast, there's 2 women. And usually one of them is the owl hag in the corner, or the mammy, and the other one is the pretty ingenue young one. So you kind of go through a life cycle when you're young enough to be cast as the young one. I never was. I was playing menopausal women pretty much from when I was 12, pretty much. My first part was as my proud boast, a heavy snowflake in The Little Match Girl. I didn't even make it to be a light snowflake. I was a big kid. But anyway, and then in the life cycle of an actor, you kind of hit 35, 40, the parts draw. It's like a tap being turned off. It is that cruel. No one's going to look at you for the young ones. There's a very crude phrase that is employed that I won't repeat, but I'll tell you privately after. But anyway, it's awful. Referring to women uncast, their uncastability at a certain age. And then you go through maybe 20 years or so, and then all of a sudden in late 60s, 70s, it picks up, because suddenly you can play the owl ones, you can play the grannies, and you tend to see older actors having fantastic careers and doing Broadway and going all over the place and West End shows. So, but just there's that lull in the middle. But for fellas, it's not. And guys just keep going. There's more jobs. And the older they get, it doesn't make any difference.
A lot of that comes back to what was discussed on the earlier panel when Miriam was talking, and the panel were talking about the kind of judgment that women get, on television, or when they are in public life, that, it's open season for criticizing their hair and what they're wearing and their weight and how they look and all the rest of it. And I think
we saw that with the Amber Heard, Johnny Depp.
Absolutely.
Whatever. I just couldn't read it after a while, because I kept thinking there's a pair of them kind of in it, really, But it was just, she was, no matter what she did, she was damned if she did, she was damned if she didn't. She was just, she could do no right.
Yeah. But I think girls learn, and this is something I've written about in the book. I think girls learn at a very early age that no matter, and it's awful. I mean, I'm the mother of 3 daughters, and you can watch them when they get that realization that no matter what they achieve as young women, they better look either hot or cute while they're doing it, because that'll add a lot of value to whatever they have achieved. And if they don't have that, their achievement is kind of tarnished in some way. And that really just boils my blood. And then as you get older, you add a good dollop of ageism comes in then when you're told, as well as all that, you should be off fighting aging, which again, I think is just a way to divert us from both our money and our
I was offered a
self-confidence.
commercial. I was, commercial casting and ad casting. And you know what it was for? Chairlifts, stair lifts. I'm 55. I'm in runners. I'm mobile.
Well, I
Stay in a
always-
stair lift.
You weren't as bad as
Oh, I'll be the face of incontinence pants, yes.
I was just going to say that, and I know she won't mind me saying this because I know she said it on telly. Fiona Looney, who's a friend of mine, and she recounts how she was offered again. Her agent rang her, great gig, yeah, an ambassador for Tenna Lady. It's like, no, jog on.
Nothing against Tenna Lady.
No, but
yeah.
Tell me about going back to we were talking about Anna's childhood. Storytelling and being exposed to stories starts when you're a child. Do you have a
Oh,
memory?
listen, we were in our house, but people talk about, when I was a child, I was given Little Women to read, and I was given all the classics, and I'd read them by the age of 10. No, we were given comics, and we were a big comic house, and I was the only girl with boys. So Hotspur, Victor, all of and then when I got older, it was Mandy, Bunty, Judy. Do you remember all those? But it's funny, I kept a lot of them, and I went back to reread them just for pig iron, and when I should have been working. And I was astonished how many of the heroines, do you remember there was the standalone stories in like Bunty, Judy, Mandy, but then there were the follier uppers, as we used to call them. There was the serial ones, and there was one called Film Star Nurse. The plot is in the title, and she was basically a film star who wanted to relinquish her past and be a nurse. And there you go. But then there was the 4 Marys, do you remember? Mary Cotta, Mary Raleigh, Mary Simpson, and I can't remember the other one, Mary Carr, I think. But and they played lacrosse. And we were, what? And they went to really posh boarding school, and they just solved crimes and had adventures. And I was just hooked on these. But I was astonished rereading them as an adult, not that long ago, how many of the stories involved heroines who fought crime in their underwear.
There,
Yeah.
back to that again.
And there was Valda. Do you remember Valda in Mandy, who was reared by wolves in the forest?
So you bypassed Enid Blyton for the comics, did
The
you?
comics were great.
Do you remember being read to as a child or reading books as a child?
Yeah, well, because the whole dyslexia slow class thing, my mother decided to buy me a book a week. So on Saturdays, I'd go to Eason's on O'Connell Street, and I get a book, and then I go to McDonald's, and then I'd spend I'd literally sit in my room for the next 3 or 4 days and read that book until it was finished. So I read everything Enid Blyton ever wrote. I started off with Topsy and Tim, which was like real basic, but I went for all of those, and I used to walk myself down to the Ballymun Library at like 6 and 7 years of age, and I'd say hello to the librarians and go in, and they'd go, there she is again, look at her sitting there on her own, delighted with herself, going through the books, sitting on the floor. And yeah, and sometimes there was like, they'd catch me in the adult section, they'd be like, out you come, you little lunatic, sitting on the floor going, what's this, so I read a lot. Yeah.
It's one of the nicest things I think you can do with kids is to read them. And now that I'm a
Were yours
grandmother-
readers?
My 3. Well, I was always a reader and loved books forever and always read. My eldest daughter, and she was, with the eldest, you make all the mistakes because you want to be the perfect mom, and you're still buying all that bullshit about how you have to do everything, they have to eat all the right stuff. And by the 3rd, you've given up on all of that, and you really don't care as long as they're still alive in the morning. But I really wanted to try and get her to read, and I did everything. And she never took to reading. And I remember a teacher in school in about 4th or 5th class and her English wasn't great. And she was saying, does she read? Like, her vocabulary could be wider. She'd kill me if she knew I was telling this story. But anyway, and I said, well, no, she doesn't. And I've bought books and I've tried to encourage her, and I read. And all she reads is comics and magazines. She said, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what she's reading as long as she's reading. But she still doesn't read. My other two dip in and out. They're both at college now, so they keep telling me, Mom, we're reading for college and we're too busy reading for college to read for enjoyment. But I'm hoping they'll pick that up again. But when I think back to when I started, when I was a late teenager and I started to work, and what I had, I ate up all the Enid Blytons. But then I remember when I started to work, and it kind of makes me wonder, did this balance out the lack of sex education I had from the nuns in junior school? Is that Jackie Collins? I read Jackie Collins, like every single thing she wrote, which possibly explains a lot later in life. But anyway, where do you, you've told us about the fixer. Where do you mine in your own life for inspiration for the stories you tell in your books?
Come here, how long have you got? I will tell you a true story that I'm sorry, I just keep coming back to it. Real life trumping fiction. I've just finished a new book that's out in August, and it's called I don't like the title, but anyway, we'll come back to that. But it's based on a true story. The working title is The Love Algorithm. It's about online dating, which I'm single, I'm long-term single. And for those of you who have never done online dating, then lucky you. It is a load of poo. The last time I went on an online date was with a school teacher, true story. And he taught in Belvedere. He was not telling lies because I have a godson in Belvedere. And the godson said, oh yeah, Mr. blah, blah, blah. Yeah, he's all right. Yeah. What are you going to with him? And anyway, we met, and he had said to me before, you always meet on a first date for coffee, because coffee's kind of safe and it's public and it's half hour. And if you like the look of each other, maybe it can be extended. And if not, after half an hour, you're quite within your rights to go, yeah, I'm on a meter, I'll see you. And that's fine. So anyway, we met, and this guy had said to me before, a perfectly nice man. And he'd said he'd never married, but he had a daughter who was like maybe 13 or so, but the daughter's mum was American, and they'd relocated back to Seattle. So he said, it's not easy getting to see her, particularly in COVID times. But he said, I tried to get over as often as I can, because he had a very close relationship with the daughter. And I was thinking, ticking a lot of boxes here. This is all good. So we met, we had the chat, and after, I'm not joking, about 10 minutes, he said, yeah, so I'm going over to Seattle to see my daughter and the confirmation. And I said, oh, well, I hope you have a great time. And he said, actually, it's just flights are so expensive. And I went, yeah. And he said, just kind of smashed at the moment. And he said, I know we haven't met, but if you had, like, you couldn't just lend me like maybe 200 euro. And I thought, I've friends 30 years and I wouldn't ask them for a bottle of water, like 200 euro. So I just kind of finished up the coffee and got out of there. And I thought, isn't that, I just thought, I'm one Egypt woman of maybe 30 that he could have met in a month. He could have made himself thousands. And he was legit. He was genuinely a teacher in Belvedere. But no, wait, I'll tell you a better one. So the story of the love algorithm is online dating for you. A very dear friend of mine, not unconnected with the cast of Fair City, went on an online date, had been meeting this guy, messaging him. And unusually, he suggested for a first date dinner. And I was saying, oh, geez, dinner's a bit of a stress because dinner can be a couple of hours, supposing you don't get on. But he suggested a well-known, quite expensive, posh restaurant in Dublin for this dinner. And for a first date. So I was thinking, oh, right, okay. And they met, and that was it. He arrived in, and she's vegetarian, and he started ordering this, that, and he was ordering everything. He worked in sports management, and he said, I'm just starving. I've just come in from a match at this. And he was ordering this, that, the other, bottles of wine that cost like 80 euros. She was driving. She was on fizzy water. And second bottle of wine. And she was thinking, the bill, Jesus, the bill is going to be unbelievable. And they finished and they're kind of, making quite stilted conversation. And she's doing all the right things, asking questions, appearing interested, all the things you're supposed to do if you want to get a boyfriend. And after the main, he said, he excused himself, just bathroom break. 5 minutes passes, 10 minutes passes, 20 minutes passes. The waiter comes over and says, you were actually going to need the table back by whatever time. And they had been direct messaging via the website, Tinder. And she was messaging him going, where are you? No response. She'd no mobile for him. She asked the waiter to check the men's. She went outside to see, was he having a fag? He left. He left her with the bill for about 800 euros.
Oh, Jesus.
That's a true story. So she said, you can use it in a book. So I went, oh, thank you. So it's about online dating. And that is one example out of how many, true story.
I'm shocked.
My
I'm
husband
shocked.
walks
Don't be
out on me tomorrow, I'm going to die alone. That's it. I don't care.
Sorry,
He
say
can
that
go.
again?
If my husband walks out on me or drops dead or whatever, like if it ends tomorrow, I'm going to die alone. I'm going to be that crazy cat lady or dog lady or whatever. I
think
could
you're-
not be
I think
arsed.
you're nearly there.
I think I am. Well, I'm halfway there. Well, I have the husband at the moment, but
Yeah.
when he goes, that's where I'm at. I couldn't do
It
it,
is
for
hell.
love nor money.
just stunned.
Tinder, a really good pal, who's a very smart, intelligent woman. You know who she's claiming she met on Tinder? Now, maybe she's telling the truth. I think catfish. You know what catfishing is. Tony Holohan. He's widowed. 20 minutes. 20 minutes widowed. Could be wrong. And I'm going, she's saying it's definitely him. We've nicknamed him Tinder Tony. Oddly, there's no photo posted, oddly. And she said, oh, no, he rang me and it's definitely him. He talks like a doctor. This is a 55-year-old.
I'm looking forward to that book already. I'm just stunned that anybody, but this guy, the 800 euro fella, would do that in person. Do you know what I mean? I can kind of understand how somebody thinks they'll get away with, scamming somebody online.
2
when they're
bottles
kind
of wine.
Anonymous. But to sit in front, I don't know. That's very strange.
That's nothing.
Okay, so back to stories and kind of seriously, one of the things again I've been thinking about a lot recently. I'm not going to say it's in the book, but it's in the book. Is about how it is stories, and again, this leads back to the earlier conversation, which focused on social media and a lot of the negativity around social media. But one of the good things about social media is that it has no gatekeepers, and it allows people, women very often, to have a voice that they perhaps otherwise wouldn't, or a platform that perhaps they otherwise wouldn't. And it was personal stories largely that drove the marriage equality referendum and the repeal of the eighth, when people bravely shared very personal stories that moved hearts and minds. So there is a really serious kind of side to, and I think with women, it's particularly important that the stories we all have in our lives from our lived experience, that we learn to share them outside of the social spaces that we are comfortable with. So for example, from where I sit, it looks like women are usually very happy to share their personal stories with other women, over coffee or at the book club or on the golf course or wherever else, but maybe more reluctant to share their personal stories in a more mixed environment, at the dinner party or out in the pub or, where there's men around as well. And I was listening to Women's Hour the other day, and the writer Kate Moss was on, and she was talking about how men generally read books that are read by men, or that are written by men. Women read books that are read by both men and women. And there's a whole, I started, why is that? And she was making the point, and I'm not sure if it's the same here, that even it starts with the educational system, that most of the texts that the children read are written by men and not women. But also this whole thing of women's fiction, that women are writing something that is just for women, which again keeps our stories corralled into a separate space.
But also it makes them less than. It's a code for you mightn't be interested in this. This is written by a woman, and it's usually a female protagonist. So just so you know, fellas, it's women's fiction. It's a woman, just in case you pick it up by accident. But I have a story on that. There's my books are supposed to be women's fiction or whatever, and the covers you were talking about, you know, we were talking about covers, and I was saying to you that this is such a beautiful cover, Wise Up, by Barbara Scully. It's excellent. But I was saying, what a beautiful cover, right? Because she actually got to choose it herself. And when you do the kind of fiction that we do, we often don't get that choice. And you get this romantic, frilly, shitty cover that absolutely doesn't say anything about what you're trying to deliver. But because you're a woman, you're being put into a box. And it's like, oh, it's a woman, so it must be romantic. It must be a romantic story. Now, I'm about as romantic as a fart in a car. And about the first 10 of my books, there was these real, you know, whimsical women with their heads missing, and it was just this weird setup that will absolutely, a man will look at that book and go, I'm not picking that up, are you joking me? And that really pisses me off, because what I have noticed over the past number of years is that with the whole advent of reading online and all of that kind of technology, is that more men are choosing my books just from the back, from the blurb. But I did get a letter once by a guy who said to me, Dear Anna, I just want to say that I've read more than one of your books, and I find them excellent, and congratulations to you for telling those stories. I really was engaged, and not only engaged, but I actually laughed. So thank you. And then he said his name, and then he said, P.S. I'm not gay. And I went, fuck you.
Patronizing much.
You son of a bitch. Well, thank you so much for writing, and well done for being able to read a book by a woman.
But how difficult is it for both of you when you're working with, I mean, you know, I'll be honest, my book was published by a startup publisher in the UK, which is how I managed to have so much input into the design and the layout and the title and all the rest of it, which I'm now discovering I was lucky, because how much control or input do you have when you're working with the bigger mainline publishers?
Zero.
Like you guys?
Marketing, I have zero say in how I'm marketed. Zero. And I've learned to pick my battles. You know, like they will title the book. You can kind of fight the fight, but you're never going to win. Marketing, any title, cover, I have zero say. And you know, your agent will hold your hand through that. But sorry, can I tell you a story? You know, you were talking about the guy who wrote to you. I got a letter one time, pre-social, before you know, when people would write to your publisher and they would forward it on to the author, and it said, it was really nice, it was some guy. And he said, I don't normally read books written by women, but I picked up yours, and I just want to say I thought it was very funny. And I thought the story was good, and I read the whole thing from the very start to the very end. So thank you. And I was going, that's really nice. Lovely. Yeah, delighted. And then signed John. And then it said, P.S. Excuse me writing this in crayon. They won't allow me have anything sharp in here. Sorry, that's a terrible story.
That's brilliant. But coming back to that whole thing, you know, it is interesting, because when I wrote Wise Up, I was writing it very much with women in mind, and you know, assuming that the readers would be women, probably women in their 40s, 50s, 60s, and beyond. But what has happened, and it's only been out just over a week, but what has happened is that any of the PR that I've done that has landed me into radio stations, with the exception of one interview, all of the people who've interviewed me have been men, which points to two things. Well, the negative is we still have a problem in broadcasting, particularly in local radio, with not having enough women on air and presenting programs. But number two is that I was amazed that most of the presenters read the book. And I knew that from how they interviewed me. And got it and enjoyed it, which was a revelation. And again, I'm just thinking now, maybe it's because the cover isn't, you know, the kind of pink, frilly, you know, misty kind of covers that you see on women's fiction. And I think also there's a thing where we think that because chick lit now has been dropped, which was even worse.
Yeah.
But women's fiction is really only slightly better. I mean, I just don't understand why women are corralled into this genre of
Well,
their
I've
own.
had this argument recently, actually, because the book that's just coming out in June next week,
What's it
Waiting
called?
for the Miracle. It's a shit name. It was. I know it is. I tell you.
Anna, don't do that.
No, I tell you, it
Just
pisses
say
me
what
off.
the name is.
It's Waiting for the Miracle. But basically, this really annoys me because we have the same publisher, don't we? I think we have the same editor, right, Sarah? Yeah. So she is fantastic. She's
Sarah's great.
No, she's great. We love Sarah, right? But it's really funny because over COVID we were having a meeting because this book is the kind of second time it's come out in paperback, and we had a meeting online, and there was about 7 of us online in this Zoom meeting trying to come up with a name for this book, right? And we discovered in the middle of the meeting, we were really struggling with it. It was a really hard book to name because it was so amazing and so wide ranging, you know what I mean? And had so much in it, just how can you produce this into a name? It's so hard, right? So anyway, we were really putting our thinking caps on. And the next thing is, we were coming out with really awful suggestions. And the next thing is, Sarah came out with, I was listening to Leonard Cohen last night, and I was thinking, what about Waiting for the Miracle? And it turns out everybody online was a massive Leonard Cohen fan. And I just went like this. Literally, she went, I was just thinking, like, just hear me out. I was listening to Leonard Cohen. What about Waiting for the Miracle? And I just went like this. Yes, that's it. That's it, because we're all Leonard Cohen fans. And that's cool, because Leonard Cohen is cool.
Yeah.
Anna McPartlin is not that cool, right? So when you put that name on a book and then you put some flower pots with some blue and some yellow flowers, and it's about women who can't have children. So one pot has a flower in it, and one has a kind of a small little, bit of a root, and the next one has nothing in it. That'll represent the likes of me, nothing in the pot. And then you call it Waiting for the Miracle. It's off-putting, but we didn't think it through.
Do you know what I'm just thinking? You know the way with a play, if you were marketing a play, you just have title, author. That's it.
I know.
That's it. There's no image. There's no, that's it. That's all we need. Cast possibly, but that's it. And that's enough. And that works.
I say this because I think this is important, because you were saying that you didn't have a voice. And this is where actually talks like this help, and help in the industry as well, is that you feel like you don't have a voice, because what the publisher does is, so the first book, the cover, it all was just off-putting, right? And so for the paperback, they come out to you, right, about 3 months before it comes out, or 4 months before it comes out, and you get an email, and the email reads like this, and you'll recognize this instantly. Hi, Anna, team here. We've got the cover. We have worked so hard on this and so tirelessly, and everybody has put everything into it, and we absolutely love it, and we absolutely know it's the right cover, and that's code for this is what it is. Don't complain. There you go, right? So I got the cover and I went, absolutely under no circumstances is this the cover. It's another L one trying to water a plant that isn't going anywhere, right? Standing on a doorstep, and I'm like, absolutely not. So I just said, look, I'm not going to be angry or aggressive or rude or any of those things. I'm just going to go, hey team, thanks a million for all the work, but no. It's not happening, and these are the reasons why. And I listed all the things that have annoyed me for the last 15 years of publishing: how women are boxed, how these stupid covers that, why if my name was Alan, what is the cover that you would put for me? And yes, I'll hold my hand up to the name that isn't brilliant, but I did ask, is it possible just to have a blank? Is it possible to just go blank, a black cover or something? Because I am sick and tired of rubbish covers and of people being put off my work because of artwork that just says nothing about the story. And actually, they came back with something. They listened. We had a meeting. They came back with something quite good. I mean, I'm not going to say amazing, but really quite good. And it was really like we all worked together on it. Like I was pulling my German covers going, see the Germans, they know how to do it. Go there. Yeah. And they did. They listened. Yeah. So sometimes as women, we tend not to complain, and we tend to just go, oh, well, the team worked hard, and you know, and it took that amount of time for
And
me
books
to go,
are
no.
so personal as well. Like this, they're solo projects.
Yeah, and you don't want to
until
be that
point.
person
Yeah,
that's
who's
like,
being
oh,
kind of-
me,
yeah.
you know, but you also, and because women are told, oh, you're being aggressive or you're being hysterical. There's no, and I'm like, no, I'm not. I'm telling you that the reason this book was not picked up last July,
Yeah.
it just wasn't. It got all the shop fronts. It got a huge amount of publicity. It got, I mean, everything that could be thrown at this book was thrown at it. It was one of Rick and Sinead's picks. It got everything it needed to get to do well. And people walked by it.
Yeah.
And that was the argument I made. And
Yeah.
I just said, I'm not being hysterical. I'm not being emotional. I am just looking at it from a business point of view and going, why did the people walk away? And the reason is because they looked at that cover and they expected something, and they picked it up and they turned the blurb and they saw something else.
Yeah.
They did not match.
Yeah.
And that was the argument.
Yeah. Interesting. Can you? Yeah. Well done. For
Oh,
standing up,
thanks for the support. Yeah,
And I
go
mean-
buy the book, okay?
And I mean, the truth is that, you know, the cliche is don't judge a book by its cover, but everybody who
do.
buys books, your first judge is with the cover. So the cover is really, really important. Talk to me a little bit about the kind of technical side of telling a story in fiction. Says she who'd love to write fiction, but it always bamboozles me when I get to a certain point. How much structure do you need to set out on writing a book? Do you know exactly where you're going and where you're going to end up?
There's a great quote from Roddy Doyle. I love Roddy Doyle. Yeah, I know, he's great. And he said, he was asked this very same question, and he was asked at the beginning of any of your stories, do you know the last scene? Do you know exactly story arc, where it's going? You know, the sort of, if you were to describe it as a play, what would be the beginning, middle, end, climax, anticlimax, all of that? And he said, no. He said, that's a bit like, he said, when you start a story, when you have the initial springboard, he said, that's a bit like going on a date with somebody you've never met before, or meeting someone in a bar for the first time, and striking up conversation for the first time and saying, okay, so what is your name? And this is who I am, and where were you educated, and what do you do for a living? What are your family? And here's my backstory. And then saying, okay, well, I think we should probably date for maybe 3 years, 2 to 3 years, and then maybe we'll move in together. We'll meet each other's family in the interim, of course, and then we'll move in. And this is on a first meeting. And then we will live together, see how that works out. And then maybe we will look at getting engaged down the line. And then we will set a date and we'll marry. And I'm thinking 2 kids. Like he said, you can't map it out in the initial stages with that much exactitude. You have to allow for a bit of leeway. You have to allow for characters, and that's the joy of writing, who come in and take you left field in a place that you thought, oh, geez, this is a new twist to it. But for me personally, what I would do is, and I often talk at writers' workshops, is if I am starting something new, I say to people, and I do it myself, write it as a short story. Now, short stories are 1,000 words. So 1,000 words, you do that in a day. That isn't a challenge. And just write beginning, middle, end, as if it was a tiny short story that was going to be published in the Ireland Zone or the Woman's Way. And if you come to the end of your short story and you think, actually, there was loads of characters I didn't get to bring in, and there was loads of places I wanted to go, and I just ran out of time, then you know you're onto something. Because a novel, you're asking a reader to pick up the book, which is hard enough, and then go on a journey with you that's possibly 300-400 pages long. A book has to be minimum 90,000 words. So that's a fair old whack. And no reader is going to commit to you unless you are grabbing them from the absolute outset. Because why would you? There's too much competing for our attention now. With Netflix, with stuff being downloaded, there's too much going on. We're all too busy. So that's what I'd say. I'd say write it as a short story. And if you think it has further legs, you're onto something. Also, I say the drawer is your friend. Loads of people say to me, oh, I'd love to write a book, but I've started a couple of things and I just shoved them in the drawer because they were crap and no one's going to read them. And I said, well, leave it in the drawer. But the drawer is your friend because you'll revisit it in time to come. And you might pull it out and look at this story that you wrote however many years ago and go, actually, it wasn't bad. There was something there and a new direction to it that will get you out of the unstuck place where you are comes and occurs. And then maybe you're onto something.
That's very interesting. Yeah. I mean, when I set out to write, and I've wanted to write a book, and when I set out to write Rise Up, which I did during COVID because there was nothing else to do except ride my bike and, as my middle daughter calls, writing out your little thoughts. So I wrote out my little thoughts and then cycled and had some more thoughts. But I thought when I got to about 75,000 words, I've written a book. That's deadly. I didn't realize I'd written a first draft, which, you know, the amount of work and time that had to
Only
go into
starting.
to fix. Yeah, that was a complete revelation to me. You know, and that was the getting to 75,000 words was hard because I've the attention of a goldfish and tend to kind of spin off in directions that had nothing to do with what I was writing about. But the amount of work that goes into the actual editing and the chopping, because it's like killing your kids.
And then you've got to be brave. I say to people at writers' workshops, it is highly unlikely that a publisher is going to walk past your front door, knock on it, and say, "Hiya, Barbara, how you doing? Were you working on anything recently? Have you anything shoved in a drawer we could have a look at?" You've got to get brave. You've got to find out who the agents are out there. And an agent is your best friend. An agent is your first. They hold your hand through it all. They're a matchmaker, a bit like an old-fashioned matchmaker. They will go, "Okay, so your Barbara's here and she's writing Rise Up, available in all good bookshops." And they'll say, "Okay, it's nonfiction. So what editor do we know that's out there now who's particularly shopping for nonfiction, for, you know, the 40+ market, for all of the boxes that you just suggested there?" They will mind you from day one, but you do have to be a bit brave.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Anna, tell us a little bit about, you do a lot of screenwriting. And I mentioned you've written for shows like Holby City. How different a process is that from writing a novel?
It's completely different. But just to start on the novel thing, everybody works differently. And so the Roddy Doyle thing sounds great and everything, but that's not what I do at all. So writing a novel for me is, I walk around with characters, a main character in my head for about 6 months. And I build a whole world around that character in my head, just when I'm doing my exercise, and that character speaking to me, and I'm creating that character. So I know those characters inside and out before I ever type anything down, and everything comes from character. So I have an idea of a story, but the whole story comes from character. And before I ever start typing that first page, I know those characters. I know everything about them. There is nothing that you could ask me that I wouldn't be able to say in an instant, because we were talking about this earlier. Everybody's different.
Can I ask you something, Anna? I wonder, is this because you work on Holby City? Because soap is about character. Stories come and go on a soap, but character is forever. Like Ken Barlow has had how many marriages and breakups and
Yeah,
whatever.
but I think that's why I could go in and write Holby City, because I was a novelist a long time before. The only reason I did Holby City was because the recession hit, and I was living in Wicklow, and on this, my books are in about, I don't know, something like 16 countries now or whatever, and I think they were probably it's probably about 20 countries now, but about 14 countries. And every country stopped buying books on the same goddamn day. Like, it was on a Tuesday, everybody stopped, and I had no contingency. And it was literally, I was getting the numbers in, and Germany's my biggest market, and France is my second biggest market. And then I had America, and I had the UK were coming in. America was really strong those first 2 years. And suddenly it was just gone. And there was like 2 years of it being gone. And just, you're in the depths of this recession. I remember sitting in the house going, sweet Jesus. I mean, what am I going to do? Like, do I need to retrain? So I had written a show for TV3 a couple of years before that, by accident, like kind of like you said, like I got the call and they were like, this guy has come in from Channel 5 and he was like, why does TV3 not have any drama? And they're like, well, we just can't afford it. And he was like, well, there's money there. So go to the BAI, you have till Wednesday. It was the Friday, you know what I mean? And they were like, are you on drugs? And I had spoken to this girl going, oh, I'm up for anything and blah, blah, blah. And she called me and she said, do you want to try and do this in 5 days? And I went, yeah. And we got the money. It was mental, right? And it was a mental process. Anyway, I'd written
Does that make it to screen?
It made it to screen, and I got nominated for an IFTA for it. Yeah, it was mental. It was mental. But anyway, and I kind of went back to the novel straight after that. And so when the recession hit and everybody stopped buying books around the world, I went, Christ, what am I going to do? So I started writing these scripts, and I did a sample script, and I gave it to a really close friend of mine, the guy who had edited the original TV3 thing. And he was over having an interview for Holby City as an editor. And Simon said to him, listen, we're always looking for women. Do you know anyone? He said, I know exactly who. And he gave him the sample that I had written. And Simon sent me an email about three months later. Now, at this stage, when I say we were flat to the mat, we hadn't got a goddamn penny. We had a house where the tenants weren't paying money, and it was just a goddamn nightmare. We were really on our knees at this point. And Simon sends this email from the BBC, and he said, look, any chance you're in London over the next, week or two? And I went, oh my God, as it turns out, I'm there all next week. So whatever suits you, right? And
You weren't,
I
right?
wasn't my boss. So he goes, what about Tuesday at like 12 or whatever? And I swear to God, like literally, we were we were on our knees, and I got the money together to get the flight. I did 40 hours of Holby. I'd never seen it before. I'd never watched it. I did 40 hours back to back of Holby. I knew every single character from the beginning of time, and got on the plane, got over, had a banana and a cup of coffee. I swear to God, right? Oh, and had a kidney infection, by the way. And took the pills and had a hot water bottle. And I remember waiting there's a Costa where Holby City is it's a really grim place actually, where the BBC do EastEnders and Holby and all of that. And there was just this Costa, and I remember holding up in the female bathroom for about 2 hours waiting for the meeting with the hot water bottle and the drugs. And the next thing is, anyway, put on the face, get in, go for the meeting, have the crack with Simon, talking about Holby since the beginning of time, and this character and that character, and my God, blah, blah, blah. And by the end of it, he said, oh my God, you know more about Holby than I do, right? And I was like, playing a blinder, Anna, playing a blinder, right? And he goes, I had a meeting with a guy last week who thought he was going for an interview for Casualty, right? And I said, look, I don't expect anything, but I'd love you to give me a go. And within a month, he had me on the Shadow Scheme, which is basically the BBC. They do this training thing where a writer writes the episode and then you shadow it. So I'm doing my own version, and then if it's up to speed, you get the gig. And I got the gig. And what was really nice about it was, when you get the gig, you have to go over for a meeting. So you go over and we talk about what's happening within the series, and then this is your episode, and what are your characters going to be, so all the patients are the ideas that you bring in and blah, blah, blah. So I was doing the thing, and I remember I had to stay there that night, still skint, right? Hadn't been paid. And at the same time, I had spent that summer writing The Last Days of Rabbit Hayes, and I was out of contract with Penguin because Penguin had said, look, Anna, it's not going great. The market's gone. Maybe we'll just put you digitally and build you in Ireland. And no disrespect to Ireland, it's a great country. I love living in it. But if it was my only market, I'd be living in a shoebox. So I was like, absolutely no way am I doing that. So I had a conversation with my agent. I said, look, I'm out of contract. I'm just going to write a book out of contract. And that summer, I did all the research for Holby, and I wrote The Last Days of Rabbit Hayes. And the week that I traveled over to do the meeting for Holby, again, skint. And I stayed in this hostel, right? Never forget it, right? The naivety, right? So I
But your kidney infection.
No, my kidney infection was gone. It was all cleared up, right? So this was about 2 months later when I got the gig, and I was going over, but I hadn't been paid yet, right? So I was going over to pitch so I had to stay that night, and I bought this hospital. I don't know, it was like 60 quid for the night or whatever. So the door was broken in the room, so I had to put a chair up against the door, and there was no bathroom in the bedroom. That was 2 floors down, and it was the grottiest kip you've ever. And it was just all full of these poor Polish and Latvian builders, and you'd pass them, and I'd have my little briefcase and my suit, all the stuff like before I was broke, like delighted myself, right? So all my good gear, and excuse me, and there's all these Latvian builders. And anyway, blah, 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 talking to their wives at home. Sorry, excuse me, sorry. It was horrifying, right? So anyway, I go up to the bedroom. I realize that I get into my pajamas and I'm on my phone, my friend going, look at this, this is a nightmare, right? And then I realize there's no bathroom. And I'm like, oh Christ, all night there's no bathroom. So now I have to get dressed again. Excuse me, sorry, excuse me. Right? So it's climb over all the builders. So anyway, the next morning I go and I have the meeting and I fly home. And I write the script. And on the same month that I wrote the script, Rabbit Haze went. We were on the Frankfurt book fair table, and it was bought for a ginormous sum the week before. And the next month and taken off the table of Frankfurt, and it was the big Frankfurt story. Was Last Days of Rabbit Haze taken off? Blah blah blah. And the next month that I went over to do notes, I was on the phone with my best friend going, hey, Hal, look at this. 5-star away. The bitch is back.
But that's a whole load of hard work. I mean,
That's
for
a
all
whole
the
lot of
laugh
hard
you
work.
make out
But
of
the
it.
whole point of that was that the only reason I got into a different type of storytelling was purely based on a financial need. And it's the best thing that ever happened to me because it is a completely different format. And writing a novel is like interior. It's all about your interior world, whereas scripts are exterior, and it's all about show, not tell. You know
Isn't
what I
it
mean?
funny bringing it back to our own personal stories? Because we all have stories, whether we have the talent to creatively write them and turn them into novels that people want to buy is a different thing, but we all have stories. And very often as you get older, you're able to pinpoint those pivotal moments in your life, which very often come at a time when things are pretty dark and you really feel, I'm kind of snookered here. I don't know where to go. And something happens. And it's only when you look back that you realize everything changed in that moment. But having said that, I mean, I think it was you talked about luck earlier when you were talking about actors, and luck is one thing, but I think hard work also. And, I mean, there's a huge amount of hard work.
But something Claudia said, the responsibility and for me as somebody who writes for television now is actually, when I think about it, there's plenty of women writers like me in film and television, and it's incumbent upon us to write for all women. Not, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And to really push that agenda. And for the first time, we actually can, because the support that I'm getting as a female film and television writer now is enormous by comparison to before. So we will see a change in that because those women's voices are there.
I also think it's great that we now have, and I mean, I'm thinking particularly of Lisa McGee and Derry Girls, women writing great comedy with great female characters as well, and I think that's really, really important because, as I say in the book, we all need to see ourselves reflected in the media, and I think particularly as you get older.
The book is Wise Up by Barbara Scully.
Listen, it's been great, but I want to ask, has anybody got any questions that you want to push to either of our
You all just lost the will to live.
We all have bladders here,
we have a couple of moments, just if anybody has any questions. No? You're all happy out? Okay, going to give you one last chance for your ad. Your new book is no, not my ad. I'll do my own there. What's your new book called and when is it out?
Waiting for the Miracle. Anna McPartlin, 9th of June. In all good shops.
And it may have a black cover still?
No, it has a
won't.
lovely cover.
Oh, you have a nice
now.
cover now. Yeah, exactly. Okay. And your new book.
Well, I've got a play out first. And that's called
Tell
The
us a little bit
Secrets
quickly
of
about
Primrose
Canada.
Square. I know, because everybody wants to go to the loo and have a
Just
coffee.
could you do
Well,
really
it went-
quickly? Because that's kind of exciting.
Long story short, I wrote a play. It's a first play, and because of a certain pandemic, which meant that live entertainment ground to a halt, we had I think about 3 or 4 postponements because obviously with theatre, live entertainment was the first to close and the last to reopen. But we will be back in the autumn, and I'm just so excited. I'm that thick. I spent my career moaning and whinging about how there were no jobs for women in their 50s. And I wrote a play and I forgot to write myself a part.
Anyway, so what's the play called?
The Secrets of Primrose Square.
And that's just been on in Canada, correct?
Yes, it premiered in Ottawa.
Fabulous.
Just last
That's
week.
brilliant.
Yeah.
Well done.
It's great. Thank you.
And you've plugged your new book, have you? Did you say?
Yeah.
No, what's your new book? You plugged it there, did you?
The Love Algorithm, the one about the online dating. We could
So
be here
do-
another hour, Barbara, if you reopened that can of worms about online dating. I'll keep you posted about Tinder, Tony.
We're all dying to know. We're all dying to know. And finally, I'm going to give my book Wise Up, which is a non-fiction book and is available for sale outside if anybody wants to grab a copy. Listen, thank you all for being here. It's just wonderful.
Thank you so much.
And,
Thank you,
and
Barbara.
thank you to Claudia and thank you to Anna, who are, I think you'll agree, great guests. Hopefully see you all in April.
Well done. Jesus, listen.